Good evening, everybody. My name is David Saxman, and I'm the producer of the Vigilant Griffin Show. We're having a very special guest tonight, Cameron Williams and Dr. Kathleen Nolan, who will be speaking to us on the subject of fracking and the efforts to prevent it in our area. Dr. Nolan is a representative of the Catskill Mountainkeepers, and we're very glad to have both of them on the show tonight. So with no further ado, I'm going to bring you over to them.
Thank you. Good evening. Catskill Mountainkeeper came to Woodstock and opened an office earlier this year, and many people know us as an advocacy group protecting the environment here in the Catskills. One of the most important issues that we've been addressing in the past several years is gas drilling, hydraulic fracturing in the state of New York particularly, and also in the Delaware River Basin. The process of extracting gas from deep under the ground is a difficult one and a complex one, and one that we are concerned about because of its hazards to the environment and also to human health. As part of New York State's review of the way in which gas drilling and particularly hydraulic fracturing or hydrofracking would take place in New York, it's been conducting public hearings and receiving comments from the public on an environmental review document that is produced and on draft regulations for permits. Cameron Williams, who's been volunteering with Catskill Mountainkeeper, is one of the people who has presented testimony already at the second of 4 public hearings, and we've asked him to present again some of his concerns that he raised at the hearings and present a little bit of information about the process of hydrofracking as a start to our conversation.
Thank you, Dr. Nolan, and thank you, David. I would like to read the comments that I made at the public hearings, so I'll begin with that. Good evening. My name is Cameron Williams, and I'm speaking as a concerned citizen of Ulster County, New York. If hydrofracturing, commonly known as fracking, is safe, why did the gas companies need exemptions from the Clean Air, Clean Water, and Superfund Acts? I listened to the comments this afternoon, both pro and against, and understand the need for jobs, but hydrofracking is not the answer for New York. Green jobs are. The draft supplemental generic environmental impact statement, hereafter referred to as DS-GEIS, has several glaring omissions. Number 1, there's no health impact evaluation. Number 2, no regulations are proposed for wastewater disposal. And number 3, there's no economic impact evaluation. The Marcellus Shale in New York contains high levels of radium-226, known to cause bone cancer and aplastic anemia. The DS-GEIS includes radiation measurements from several conventional gas wells in New York, most notably 2 wells in Orange in Schuyler County. One well's production brine contains 16,030 picocuries per liter of radium-226. The other 13,510. The EPA safe limit is 5 picocuries per liter. Dr. Nolan can speak more about that later. Production brine is the hydrofracking fluid combined with naturally occurring minerals and water already underground. Interestingly, and perhaps irresponsibly, the DS-GEIS uses data from Pennsylvania and West Virginia to measure radium levels in the flowback fluid, which range from 2.58 picocuries per liter to 33 picocuries per liter. Even though radium in the Marcellus Shale in Pennsylvania and West Virginia is estimated to be much lower than in New York, according to the New York Times. Geologist and Professor Terry N. Gelder of Penn State, an early and current advocate for hydrofracking, admits There probably can never be enough regulations, particularly if you're on the side of making sure this is done right. The DS-Geist does not give me the feeling that New York State is interested in doing it right, particularly when it is currently allowing radioactive production brine to be spread on roads for de-icing in 15 counties in New York State. I spoke earlier of green jobs. There are many, including small-scale hydroelectric, geothermal, solar, and more. I'd like to bring to your attention Green Acres in New Paltz, New York, the first zero-energy single-family housing developed in the United States and indeed the world. 5 homes have been built, 2 more are under construction, and more are planned. After 1 year's occupation, one of the homes recorded 1,490 kilowatt hours more energy than the home consumed. This and other innovative approaches are the sort of development New York and the United States needs to achieve energy independence, not irresponsible development of more hydrocarbon fuels at the expense of the environment. If you'd like to cue those slides, I could talk about those a little bit. Okay, this is slide number 1, and it shows the Blake Ridge area of West Virginia, northern West Virginia, and you see 4 fracking fluid pits numbered 1, 2, 3, and 4. Once the infrastructure and pipelines are in place, many states see an infill with more drilling sites and wells added in between the pits you see here. If you go to the next slide. Here we see another site in northern West Virginia prepared for gas drilling. You see the drill in the center and trucks with hydrofracking fluid around it. You see they've removed all the trees, and this is the type of view we could expect if hydrofracking comes to New York.
Actually, that slide is shows the top of the hill there.
Yes.
Completely removed and flattened off for that site.
And it's much like strip mining. Though they say it's not as harmful. Again, we see a waste pit, a fracking fluid waste pit, and that's lined with, what is the material, Kathy? It varies.
It varies. But, often it's just a lining that's like the lining of a trash can, a little thicker.
And I believe that one is nitrile rubber, but all of us who lived through the recent flooding here in the Catskills would be very worried about a wastewater containment pit like this. We know that the water levels could rise alarmingly, and that hydrofracking waste could easily flow out of that pit and into the surrounding countryside and rivers. And here we see a drilling site. The drill has been removed, and I presume they've installed the wellheads and that those trucks are full of various fracking chemicals to be injected into the well.
Fracking chemicals and water.
And water and proppants. They use proppants that you can vary from grains of sand to polymer to glass beads. All of these things have been used. The drilling companies don't want us to know the composition of the chemicals that go into the well. They insist that they are proprietary. And this is your slide, Kathy. This is taken by
Henry Fair.
Henry Fair, and you see the wastewater from a fracking operation being ejected into a wastewater storage pit. It's not very pretty.
Now, these pits have a lot of problems, as I think you're going to mention here in a minute. One of them is, as you said, the potential for the fluids to leak or to be washed out of the pit. The other is that the chemicals and organic compounds that are in the fluid can evaporate into the atmosphere and form pollution, air pollution.
It's awful. And here we see what's happened at one of these storage pits. This is March 31st, 2010, near West Middletown, Pennsylvania. And shortly after 8 a.m. on a Wednesday morning, a frac pit fire spontaneously combusted at an Atlas Energy Resources Marcellus gas well location, shooting flames 300 to 400 feet into the air. This is a picture of the fire 30 minutes after initial combustion, and a witness compared the sound of the original ignition to throwing a match on a pile of wood saturated with gasoline. The next slide shows local volunteer firefighters apparently successfully subduing the blaze. At what chemical exposure cost to them, we don't know.
Cameron, maybe we can give a little bit of background on the general process of how you frack a well, so that if there are people that are listening who are watching who are a little less familiar, they have a general picture. The process of drilling a well for gas or oil that we often carry on our heads is the old style conventional drilling, is a straight hole down into what is hoped to be a lake or reservoir of gas or oil under the earth. And that is a fairly simple process and easy recovery. The process of fracking a well is developed to improve gas recovery, natural gas recovery, when you don't have that kind of lake or reservoir under the ground. The gas industry has for many years been doing vertical fracking, where they'll frack that central core. But the relatively new technology that has generated so much concern and attention is horizontal fracturing, in which the drill bit goes down vertically for a mile or more, and then goes horizontally for a distance of a mile or more. The horizontal fracturing increases the amount of land that is exposed to that underground explosion that is intended to fracture the rock and to release the natural gas, which is mainly methane and some other volatile organic compounds. And the gas, when shaken, then would flow back up to the recovery site. The gas industry, in talking about the risk of this activity, minimized them, and they tend to portray the drilling activity as though it is going down into a layer of shale, the Marcellus shale or other shale layers that are beneath the Marcellus shale, as going through solid rock into solid rock.
They tend to make it look like a layer cake.
Yes.
On the many industry videos that are available to look at on YouTube, if you look up natural gas fracking, you'll see videos from every major gas drilling company, and that's what they all show. They show flat, even layers of rock, and then an aquifer, and they safely drill below the aquifer to what's called the kickoff point, where they steer the drill bit to go horizontally. And they portray it as completely safe. And it may be that way in some flat rock, flat land locations, Wyoming, Montana. I tend to doubt it. But and that's what the slide you interrupted shows. And I'd like to go back to that. So this is real world geography. And it shows part of this, the DON, if you viewers can see that, is the Marcellus Shale. There's a DO layer, which is the Esopus Shale, and various other layers. But what you can know, this is at the Delaware Water Gap, right near here in Pennsylvania, and it shows that the Marcellus Shale breaks the surface, and the shales come to the surface, and likewise, aquifers come to the surface. So we're not drilling through a layer cake of impermeable rock where it's perfectly safe. We're drilling into locations, not each one of which has been mapped. We don't know exactly what we're drilling into, what the gas companies are drilling into, and trying to make the point that this is not as cut and dried and safe as industry videos and reports would have you believe.
So this is a scientific illustration of those layers of shale as they occur right in this area.
Yes. And if you'd go on to the next slide, David, I took the liberty of taking some photographs of shale formations in the nearby area. This one shows the natural fracturing pattern of shale on the Sawkill Creek, not 5 miles from this studio. And the next slide. This is on West Saugerties Road, and it's another shale formation. You can see the channels, the natural fractures that occur within it. And one of my worries is that, well, if this shale is on the surface and this same shale is fractured underground, it seems likely to me that water and the fracking fluid can travel up these channels and eventually reach the surface. And a paper prepared by Dr. Tom Myers, who's done computer modeling on this recently, and will soon have, the paper is yet to be published or will soon be published?
In press.
The paper is in press now. Says that these fracking fluids can indeed travel to the surface from a mile underground in less than a year in some cases. They may take up to 20 years in others. If you could go on to and here's another shale outcrop on West Saugerties Road, again showing the natural fracturing patterns and the channels through which fracking fluid could presumably travel. And again, here's another shale outcrop. You see that it's a fairly frangible stone. Is that the correct word, Dr. Nolan? And you see how easily it fractures. And again, this causes me great concern. This one is at Plockman Lane and Route 212, right by the golf course here in Woodstock. And here, this I wanted to stress this, if you can leave this on for your viewers. There are 2 more public meetings where concerned citizens can make their statements, objections to the DS guys, and they are occurring on November 29th in Loch Sheldrake and November 30th in New York City, and you have the addresses and the times shown there. So we would very much ask you, if at all possible, come and speak about fracking and your concerns as a citizen. The DEC will take your comments into consideration. So if you could leave that up for maybe 15 more seconds for viewers to get those addresses and times, I'd appreciate it, David.
Go ahead.
And well, there's, if you could go on to the next slide. And this one, if you're unable to attend these public hearings, your comments will be accepted at the web address listed on top until 5 p.m. on December 12th. And if you would prefer to write a physical letter, the address to which to send a written letter is shown below that. So again, if you're unable to make the public hearings, please submit your comments. By the way, if you submit written comments online, you may submit numerous statements. Is that not correct, Dr. Nolan?
As many times as you would like. The documents that the Department of Environmental Conservation have prepared are arranged with separate topic headings, and so if you have a comment on one topic, you can do that at one time and then go back at another time to address another
So there's
area of
waste
concern.
disposal and the drilling process and other things on that website.
Yes. So we've been talking here about the shale layers and the drilling process, largely because this is one of the rebuttals that the gas industry will use when they're trying to argue for this process as a way to retrieve natural gas. Their argument is that the gas is below and separate from water that might be in the ground or at the surface. And if that were true, then the fracturing underground might have problems such as causing earthquakes, which is something that we can talk about.
That's been reported as well.
But the concern about water purity would be greatly minimized. What your analysis shows and your wonderful photographs show is that we're in an area where the shale that we know to be underneath us has been clawed back by glaciers and broken and is probably swirling and cutting across each other in ways that we know haven't been documented. And if that picture of what's happening at the surface, it gives us any idea of what's happening underneath, then we would expect that exploding high pressure and forcing water and chemicals into those fractures would cause them to interconnect even more.
I think so. And don't they inject water and the combination of fracking fluids at up to like 1,000,000 pounds per square inch?
It's under tremendous pressures, and the modeling that you mentioned that Tom Myers has done on a computer shows that pressurized explosion can force water and the chemicals it carries much further into the shale layers than you would have under non-pressurized conditions, and as you say, can result in his models in exactly the kind of cross-contamination of aquifers with gas layers and chemical-laden water that we've been concerned about. So in terms of the potential effects on water quality, we have a plausible mechanism for these materials to reach either groundwaters or surface waters, potentially. And we know the chemicals themselves are toxic. Although the industry doesn't release complete lists for each site, the chemicals that they have described that they use are known toxins. Some of them are toxic in parts per billion, and having them underground for generations is a real hazard. They don't biodegrade in most cases. So this would not be an acceptable disposal method for most of these chemicals. And to put them into a situation where you're exploding and therefore you lose control over where they might end up, particularly problematic.
I agree with that 100%. And that brings to mind something I wrote about 3 years ago. I think I sent to you. A reporter for the Fort Worth Star-Telegram was able, and since the DEC has obtained a list of some of the chemicals that the gas exploration companies are using in fracking fluid. But this reporter for the Fort Worth Star-Telegram found a list of 55 chemicals, and most of those were extremely hazardous to human health, so much so that when there was a spill, and this was particularly alarming to me, a nurse who treated a gas field worker who had a spill hit him. The nurse who treated him ended up dying. So
well, these chemicals, as known toxins, some of them will fall under OSHA guidelines in terms of the workers having to have limited exposure, either by protective garb or the amount of time that they would be exposed. But when these drills have gone in residential areas in other states, the setbacks, if they're very small, which they have been, allow families to be exposed to these chemicals in the air 24/7, around the clock. A much greater exposure than even a worker or someone helping a healthcare worker attending a worker.
That's awful.
In most cases.
One of those slides, and I forgot to mention, with the containment pond, the drilling site and the containment pit, as it were, is only 100 feet away from an elementary school, and the DS guys proposes setbacks of only 100 feet.
150, I think. But those setbacks are for this activity, which, as it's currently being proposed, could take place in any area that, whether it's residential or any other agricultural, any other use. So we've talked a little bit about the water quality impacts. We've talked a little bit about the air quality impacts. Just the presence of these kinds of drilling pads and equipment, it has the potential to turn these residential and agricultural areas into industrialized sites. And the equipment that's right on site isn't the whole of it. There's also the equipment that's needed to transport the gas once it's been collected, which could either be trucks with truck traffic or pipelines, which also have their impact on the environment. Pipelines require compressor stations, and the compressor stations use diesel fuels. So in sites that have had a lot of this activity, very intensive drilling and piping of the gas, there are air quality impacts that make pristine wilderness areas or open space areas equivalent to Los Angeles traffic.
So there's been an increase in asthma rates in those areas and other pulmonary diseases, if I'm not mistaken. Also, this industrial activity, I heard, I don't know if this is true, but I heard that this industrial activity taking place near residences can violate the terms of residents' mortgage agreements and render their mortgages invalid. Banks could conceivably foreclose on people's homes.
Yep, most mortgages do not allow this type of activity. It may invalidate homeowners insurance. So people who are signing leases really have the situation where they may not be able to sell their home at a point where they would want to, or obtain further equity from their home. This brings up the economic aspect of drilling and the jobs and money that might come from pursuing this activity. As you mentioned, and one of the things that the industry uses to promote itself and to encourage people to sign leases. The difficulty for the person signing the lease, as we said, if they do intend to try to live on their land, they may find that it's much less livable than they'd expected. If they plan to have income from selling the property, they may run into difficulty. But the economics for the larger community or for the state are a little more complicated. The industry touts the job creation, and there is some, although many of the jobs are jobs that are very specialized, and so the industry brings in their crews.
Oklahoma, Arkansas, Texas, and so few of the jobs are for locals.
Right. What does come into the communities that have this activity, as we've seen in neighboring states, is some construction for housing for the workers, and some activity around handling those workers while they're there. But the industry brings in the equipment, fracks the well. They say that they may be there as long as 20 years trying to extract gas. Sometimes it's much shorter, especially if the well is unproductive. So they may make a fairly big scar and impact on the land and on the community, and then be gone in 3, 5, 10 years, leaving behind this kind of boom-bust legacy, where the boom has perhaps brought some money to a few individuals and to the gas industry, and the bust has come to the rest of the community.
So overall, it sounds like a net negative to me.
I'm greatly concerned for the communities that would go in this direction, even if they do have, a depressed economy at present. There are just seem to be so many other better options for preserving or improving the economic outlook for a community. There's a real question about whether communities themselves get to decide about this. We mentioned that people can lease their land. If enough people lease land in a given area, then other property owners who didn't sign leases can have this activity take place beneath their land
without their permission.
Without their permission. This was a law passed about 4 years ago that created what's called compulsory integration. The landowners who are close enough to others who want this are integrated into the general drilling framework. They may be compensated, they have to be compensated for that, but they don't have a choice about whether or not to allow the activity. This is very problematic and has caused neighbors to fight against neighbors in some regions where individuals bought their homes expecting to have a home or a farm, and if enough neighbors are starting to sign leases, it can put their farm at risk, especially if they're doing something like organic farming or an activity where the toxins in either the water or the air would be harmful to their crops or to their livestock.
So a farmer could lose his organic certification with this activity taking place near his property. And there's deviation. That's another thing I wanted to mention is, again, the industry says they're drilling precisely and they're making a turn. They call it the kickoff point, where they go horizontal. And, they have it mapped exactly. But in reality, that kickoff point, the direction in which the wellbore goes can deviate by 5, 6 degrees. So over the course of a mile, with a deviation of 5 or 6 degrees, they could end up 5, 6 football fields away from where they intended to. And they could be blasting proppants immediately underneath an organic farm, which they hadn't even intended to do.
There's the drill bit itself, and then there's the explosion, which is controlled to a certain degree, but the propagation of that and the fracturing is not completely controllable. We mentioned briefly, but we should go back to the possibility that this activity would generate earthquakes. 2 studies have now been validated that point, one in England and one out west, in which the center of earthquake activity was plotted and shown to come from a hydrofracking site. And the hydrofracking activity was stopped and the earthquake stopped.
Right, in the case in Lancashire, England, it was the drilling company itself admitted, yes, we caused this seismic activity, and there's been subsidence of the land as well documented associated with fracking.
Describe and define subsidence.
That the ground sinks.
Sinkholes opening up. I have a question in my own mind about whether those sinkholes are from withdrawal of water, which we know can cause that, or whether it's from the withdrawal of the gas itself. Or whether it's simply that after the fracturing, the rock layers settle.
Yeah. And we don't know.
We don't know. study in England was actually the government did the study, and then the gas industry did accept the results.
Accepted their findings.
Yes.
Well, there's another thing I'd like to mention, and that's that the gas companies tout this as a net benefit to the American citizen. It's going to bring energy independence to America, and that it is natural gas is a clean burning fuel and much less dangerous than refining oil. And yet I've read that its carbon footprint is greater than that of other fossil fuels because of the amount of trucks needed to go to sites to frack the wells in one case, and also that the methane or methane released naturally during the process is a greenhouse gas, 20 times more potent than carbon dioxide. So throughout the fracking process and recovering of methane, there's methane leaking into the atmosphere and causing further global warming rather than solving the problem. Would you care to speak on that?
Well, I agree that the concerns about natural gas as what they call a transition or a bridge fuel, it's not a very good one. And at best, it's not much worse than coal or oils, and that's not saying much. The amount of recoverable carbon fuel that's in the earth has been estimated by some groups to be so small remaining that by 2030 or 2050 we'll be out of it. Well, this means we're ready to be into new fuels already, and probably the best place to keep what natural gas we have remaining is underground in case we need it out decades from now. The other part about the industry's claim that natural gas is the way to go is that argument was made so successfully in the years of the Bush administration that we have all these exemptions for the gas industry for their activities that you mentioned. Exemptions from the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act, and most troubling to me from the Superfund cleanup requirements. And these are called the Halliburton loophole because Dick Cheney with Halliburton pushed these through as part of an energy act that was supposed to shift us over to natural gas and make us energy independent. It is not at all clear that the small amounts of natural gas, even if we pursued this activity across the country, would indeed provide us with any energy independence. Current reservoirs are high enough that the natural gas that's being extracted at present in other states is being sold to be shipped overseas, so it's not being used for domestic purposes. And these exemptions from these laws that are intended to protect the environment are what are most troubling to me. The Superfund Act in particular, Superfund Act came in after Love Canal, when the industries were shown to be contaminating the ground and injuring people. And the Superfund Act was put in place so that people who were harmed in such a way could have a cleanup of that site and have their health concerns addressed. When you're exempt from that law, even if somebody could show that you had contaminated a site or caused a problem, the industry's been given a blank check.
Can't touch me, I'm exempt.
They would not have to take responsibility for that. And that's one of the reasons I think it's really an opportunity in New York State to proceed more slowly, gather more information from from other states that are pursuing this industry intensively, and hold off until the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, is also doing a study. You want to say more about that?
Yeah, the EPA is doing a detailed study. They've released this month a study plan showing what they hope to accomplish in their study. And I would think that New York State, with its agriculture and tourism industries, which are profitable, it's one of the most popular tourist destinations in the United States, both for foreigners and for citizens of the United States. I would think we would wait until the end of 2012, when the EPA releases its final study, to make up our mind whether we're going to allow this activity in the state. It would just seem to be prudent to me to wait that long. Why the rush? We're not going to run out of gasoline by the end of next year.
Well, there are tremendous pressures from the industry to move forward. Ramsey Adams, the executive director of Mountainkeeper, has said that the industry wants to keep us addicted to natural gas, and so it wants to go ahead at full pace and have the extraction take place and have us switch over to using this fuel instead of using more sustainable energy sources such as wind, solar, geothermal, and other fuel alternatives, hydrogen. So the industry has a lot of pressure, and they have a great amount of money to put into PR. In every paper and every television channel, there are ads touting natural gas as the fuel of the future. So the opposition to that industry energy needs to be informed citizens who participate in this process, who let their elected leaders, especially Governor Cuomo, know about their concerns, and that these are well-grounded concerns. The industry is saying that it offers benefits and therefore should be allowed to go ahead. I think if citizens are concerned about the hazards of this activity, then they need to make that known as well. We talked before, just mentioned that in residential or agricultural areas this industry could come in. A couple of towns have recently been sued because they tried to prevent that from happening.
Home rule.
In New York State, there is home rule, which allows our municipalities to determine what happens in our borders, in our town. And many places across New York State have used that to try to restrict the areas in which the industry can operate, either by zoning or through addressing aquifer protection or through addressing truck and vehicle traffic, basically saying that their region is being used for something else other than industry, and they want to keep it that way. Because the oil and gas industry is treated specially as a mining industry, the state of New York is the only entity that is allowed to regulate the gas industry. And so the gas industry has interpreted that function of the government, saying that the state is the one to regulate, to challenge these municipalities who are trying to use home rule to restrict the areas in which the industry operates. 2 towns have been sued, Dryden and Middlefield, in northwestern New York. We don't have results yet on those court suits. So, cases were just brought recently, but they will be very hard fought on both sides to try to protect the realm in which communities can determine for themselves whether they become industrialized in the way that clearly gas drilling would industrialize any area where it's taking place.
And that's something else that disturbs me, is that I've heard that now only 15% of the state is protected under the current draft's SGICE. And that would be the Syracuse watershed and New York City watershed and any state park. But I just heard that parts of state parks that are privately owned and not part of the watershed, and there are parts of the Catskill Park that fit that profile, those would not be off limits to gas drilling.
Not under the current regulatory scheme. Also, in addition to New York City, Watershed, and Syracuse are what are called primary aquifers, which are aquifers that provide water for municipalities, unfiltered water. But these areas are, in the case of New York City and Syracuse, they are large populations of people and unfiltered water sources. But the truth is that the municipalities that have filtered water supplies would not be protected by that filtering, because most of the toxic chemicals in this fracking fluid and the returned fluids are not removed by filters. So it's not clear to me that it should be only...
You can't remove radiation with reverse osmosis.
That's correct. That's correct. So all of these places are at risk, and as you mentioned, here where we live in Woodstock, the watershed, New York City watershed, only captures the southwestern portion of Woodstock, so the rest of Woodstock is not actually protected through the current proposed scheme. And even though we're in the Catskill Park, which is land set aside for the use and enjoyment of the citizens, recreation, and natural resource protection, that under the current scheme is not yet protected. So one of the things that needs to be included in the comments that go to the state is that these special places should be protected as well, if this activity takes place at all.
And the historic locations, so by what you're telling me, everything that's east of the Ashokan or east of the Rondout and is not part of the New York City watershed, right? There are Marbletown, Stone Ridge, New Paltz. These are historic towns in New York, and they are not in the New York City watershed, and they are not in the Catskill Park. So these historic towns could undergo a tremendous transformation with wells visible every few hundred feet.
Right.
It's
a possibility. The Marcellus Shale stretches all across this region, and the Utica Shale extends even beyond that. So further north and further south.
Up into Canada. Yeah, the Utica Shale is, what, another mile below the Marcellus Shale? So it's conceivable that once they've exhausted the natural gas, say in 20 years from the Marcellus Shale, they'll use the same drilling pads to get down to the Utica. So we could conceivably be looking at gas fracking for the next 60 years.
And there's several other additional shale layers as well. So the industry usually comes in and tries to obtain permissions to reach the most easily obtained layer first, and then build on that to go after the other layers.
And once they have your mineral rights for one layer, they don't have to pay you compensation for the next.
If you've signed a lease that gives them your mineral rights, if you have signed a lease that only gives them rights to the Marcellus Shale, then you could hold them to that.
So
one of the things that,
careful.
yes, when the industry first came into New York State, they really took advantage of people who didn't know that they could obtain a higher dollar and that they could obtain royalties for each of these different shale layers. There is a group, Fleeced, that will tell landowners how to get out of a lease if they have decided that they signed something that they're not happy with. But the industry makes it very difficult to get out of leases. So this is something for people to be extremely cautious about.
And also, there have been disasters in Dimock, PA. And the gas companies have gone around to homeowners who have leased them property and forced them to sign non-disclosure agreements. So these are people who may not take a shower in their own home, people who have to have their water trucked in because they've been adversely affected, and they're being asked and forced literally to sign non-disclosure agreements that they may not talk to a reporter about that, they may not talk to anybody. So
when the industry claims that there's no documented cases of contamination, Part of the reason there's an absence of documentation is that the industry has gone in and obtained these non-disclosure agreements so that they then provide water or health care or whatever, or monetary compensation to a family who's been damaged, whose well has been damaged or whose health has been injured, and the family is not then able to go on the record and document that that has happened. The industry's track record around the country is not nearly as laudable as they would give it to you themselves in my review of where they've been and what they've been doing. And you mentioned some of these historic sites and sites that depend upon tourism. Just on a simple level, one of the things that could be most problematic for an area is the amount of truck traffic that could come with the creation of the industry needing to bring in millions of gallons of water for each well, or obtain it locally but still truck it to the site, and the chemicals and all of that.
And the fall in water level from withdrawing that water from local lakes, streams, and rivers.
Right. Well, we'll come back to that because the New York State has done something about that recently.
Okay.
But in terms of the truck traffic, these trucks on narrow mountain roads, which is what a lot of the area is, can increase travel times enormously and make it quite frustrating for visitors who are trying to come to the area or residents who are trying to travel between small towns. Now, in terms of the water withdrawal, this was a great concern because the amount of water that is used for each well is enormous, and each time you refrac a well, you use more water. New York State has just recently passed a water withdrawal bill that does give the Department of Environmental Conservation the right to, the obligation to monitor and issue permits for water withdrawals of 100,000 gallons per day or more. So there is now a mechanism in place for high volume water users to be regulated, and with that there's some hope that we could prevent disastrous water withdrawals that could leave aquifers dry.
Leave homeowners who depend on wells for their water with no water.
So there is a mechanism. How well it's going to work we haven't seen yet because that's a relatively new law.
Yeah.
All right. In the remaining time, I guess I would just say that whatever level of concern a person has about this activity, it's valid to bring that concern to the state through this hearings process, through comments, or through letter writing to Commissioner Joe Martens of the Department of Environmental Conservation or to Governor Cuomo.
So David, I'm going to ask you to bring up the last 3 slides so that your viewers can be sure to get that information. And the last slide is a slide for Catskill Mountainkeeper, and when that comes, yeah, I'd like Kathy to say a little bit about Catskill Mountainkeeper because it's an wonderful organization, and they do so much more than work against fracking.
Well, we're doing a lot of things that are just beginning here in Woodstock, and we certainly welcome anybody to come by and talk with us about that. Our office is at 34 Tinker Street on the 3rd floor. Cameron is there almost daily. I'm there mainly on Tuesday and Wednesday afternoons. But we also have here our phone number and our email address if people would like to carpool to the hearings in Lake Sheldrake on the 29th. Or New York City, I think people can use public transit or get down to New York City. But for the hearings at the Sullivan County College there in Lake Sheldrake, if you would like to either drive or ride and you want to call us, you can call 679-8423 or send an email message to woodstock@catskillmountainkeeper.org, or just stop by our office and let us know. We'd be very happy to give you more information. We have printed information about hydrofracking and some of our other initiatives, and we'd be happy to give you that information and help you share information with others.
Thank you.